make sure that you have the opportunity to print off a copy of the worship bulletin, as well as the song lyrics, the sermon notes, and it wouldn't hurt if you had a copy of the Southview Spirit as well. The other thing you want to make sure to have on hand is your communion elements, because later in the service we will be partaking of communion. So if you need to get any or all of those things lined up, go ahead and press pause on the playback right now. Once you have those things in place, then you can press play again and rejoin us. And friends, at this time we will go ahead and sing our opening hymn. Our opening hymn this morning is Standing on the Promises. Mark, Sharon, thank you so much. That was beautiful and an excellent choice for Father's Day. So thank you very, very much. Well, Friends, this is the time of the service when we share our joys and our concerns with you. And of course, today being Father's Day, we do want to lift up a joy for all of the dads out there. Hopefully you're able to be with your families today, and if not in person, then at least hope that you're able to visit with them on the phone or over the internet. Friends, we had a church member who passed away this past week, and so we want to remember her family in our prayers. We want to think of all of those who are in hospice care, those who have been hospitalized. We want to lift up those who are in rehabilitation. We want to pray for those who are battling cancer. And we want to remember those who are dealing with other ongoing health issues. We want to lift up prayers for those who are just needing our prayers for general concerns that they are facing. I want to lift up those who have shared prayer requests with me that they wish to remain unspoken. And friends, as always, we want to pray for unity in our nation. And we want to pray for those who are trying to battle the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, friends, at this time, we will sing our prayer hymn together. Our prayer hymn is "Breathe on Me, Breath of God." God, we know that the Greek word for breath is pneuma. And we know that the word pneuma also is the word for spirit. And we feel your spirit in this sanctuary as we record this service this morning. And God, we trust that the Spirit is moving among those who are worshiping with us online as well. God, we thank you for this day in which we are able to honor fathers, and we pray that you would allow this to be a wonderful day for them in spite of the difficult circumstances. And God, as we honor our earthly fathers, we also want to honor you, our Heavenly Father, as we lift up our voices in the prayer that Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Well, friends, normally this would be the time of the church service when I would invite the servers to come up to the front so they can gather the collection. Obviously, there are any number of ways that you can continue to support us, even though we aren't able to physically be together in the same building. And again, I want to thank you so much, those of you who have continued to faithfully support the church throughout this time of social distancing. Well, friends, at this time, we will go ahead and we will sing the doxology together.
Praise
circumstances. And God, we pray that you would take the humble gifts that are offered this morning, the humble gifts that are being offered online, and that as you always do, that you would multiply them and use them to bless people throughout the Near South neighborhood, throughout the city of Lincoln, the state of Nebraska, the United States of America, people to the very ends of the earth. God, we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, folks, if you're like me, then there have been any number of times in your life when you needed to do something that you were nervous about. Or maybe you were just flat out afraid to do it. And if you're like me, what you probably found is that when you need to do something that you're nervous about, you're afraid about, boy, that first step is the toughest, isn't it? And I can think of one occasion when that was particularly true. I mean, I've had that experience many times, but one time when I was in my 20s and I was pastor for a church in Nevada, I was in charge of the college ministry. And the college ministry decided that they wanted to go bungee jumping. And right there on the strip in Las Vegas, there was this tower that was 170 feet tall. 170 feet, it was 17 stories tall. And so what you would do is you would get in the elevator and you would ride the elevator all the way to the top, and then you'd walk out, they'd hook up that long rubber band to you, and then you would bungee jump off. And I'll tell you, of all of the things I've ever done in my life where I was nervous or I was kind of scared, that was probably the most extreme example. Because when you get right there to the edge and you're looking 170 feet down, that is a long, long way. And they had a little pool of water at the bottom, as if, you know, something were to go wrong, a little pool of water is going to help you. You're going to be splat, even if a pool of water is there, if anything goes wrong. But that is one moment that I can remember in particular where taking that first step was terrifying. And the reason I bring that up this morning is because in the passage that we're looking at today, our friend Esther has a very scary thing that she has to do. Just bring you up to speed, because this is kind of a complicated story, but it's an incredible story. It's a great story. I would contend that the story of Esther is one of the greatest stories in the entire Bible. So let's go back and let's just remind ourselves that this is taking place about 2,500 years ago, and it's happening in Persia. It used to be Babylon. Our friends, the Hebrews, had been carried off into captivity in Babylon. Then Babylon changed ownership. Now it's Persia. And some of our Hebrew friends did get to go back to Judah, but some of our Hebrew friends stayed there in exile in Babylon, now Persia. And we were introduced to a man named Mordecai, older man, a grown man. And he had a young cousin named Esther, much younger. She was a child when both of her parents died. And so Mordecai took in Esther and raised her as if she were his own child. Now, we've got Mordecai, we've got Esther, they're cousins. The relationship is probably more like an uncle and a niece, really almost like a father and a daughter. But we've got the two of them. Now, the dude in charge in Persia is King Xerxes. And we've described him before as kind of a drunken frat boy. He had a wife named Vashti, and at one point he had asked Vashti to do something that would have publicly humiliated her. And she said, no way. And he was mad. And so he banished her. And so then King Xerxes goes on a search for a new wife, for a new queen. And for better or for worse, the person who won the competition was Esther. She was absolutely beautiful, the Bible tells us. And so, Esther is the new queen of Persia. She is the new wife of the drunken frat boy King Xerxes. Probably a mixed blessing at best. Now, we're also told that King Xerxes is good buddies with a guy named Haman. And King Xerxes has elevated Haman to basically be the guy in charge in Persia. And so one of the things that King Xerxes has said is that everybody should bow down to Haman. Well, do you think our Hebrew friends are going to do that? We know that Daniel didn't do that. We know that Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego didn't do that. And sure enough, Mordecai isn't willing to do that either. And Haman notices that. And Haman is mad. He's so mad, in fact, that he goes to King Xerxes. And not only does he want to take revenge on Mordecai, but he wants to take revenge on all of the Hebrew people, all of them, living in Persia. One of the things that we also know about Haman is that he was an Amalekite. And the Amalekites and the Hebrews were enemies, had been enemies for generations and generations and generations. And so, he goes to Xerxes, says, I want your permission to do something about these people because they don't follow your laws, King Xerxes, and they keep themselves separate, and they're troublemakers. And King Xerxes might have been drunk at the time. He says, whatever you want to do, Haman, you do it. You do you. You want to kill all those people? They sound like bad people to me. Kill them all. And what Mordecai, or rather what King Xerxes doesn't realize is that his own wife is a Hebrew. He has just signed the death warrant for Queen Esther, and he has no idea. But Mordecai knows, and when Mordecai hears about this, he is incredibly distressed, as you might imagine. So Mordecai gets word to Esther, because he can't even go see her anymore. She is so highly elevated at this point that Mordecai can't even go and visit her in person. But he sends word to her that, hey, we're in trouble. The Hebrew people are in trouble. And so you need to go and talk to King Xerxes and do something about it. And the word that she sends back to her cousin, uncle, dad, whatever you want to call him, is she sends word back and says, hey, Mordecai, don't you realize that first of all, if I approach King Xerxes uninvited, that according to Persian law, I can be put to death unless he decides to basically extend me a lifeline, which he literally does by extending a scepter to me. If I approach him uninvited, the default setting is I die unless he extends the golden scepter. And then that means don't kill him. But you know what? Mordecai, even worse than that, is he hasn't even wanted to see me now for a month. I literally have not seen King Xerxes for a month. I don't know if I did something wrong. I don't know if I've fallen out of favor with him. I don't know if he's married 3 new wives since I saw him last. I don't know what's going on, but I haven't seen him for a month. So there are no guarantees here whatsoever. I could die. And Mordecai's response to Esther is, Esther, I have a feeling that you're in the position that you're in, being Queen of Persia, for such a time as this. That's where we left off. I know that's a lot of backstory, but I just want everybody to be on the same page now as we find out what happens next. Looking at Esther chapter 5, verse 1 through chapter 6, verse 5, and this is a condensed version of these 2 chapters. It says, Esther stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. When King Xerxes saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased, and he held out the gold scepter that was in his hand, so Esther approached. Then the king asked, What is it, Esther? What is your request? Well, if it pleases the king, replied Esther, let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. Well, bring Haman at once, the king said, so that we may do what Esther asks. So the king and Haman went to the banquet. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, Now what's your petition? It will be given you. Esther replied, My petition is this. Let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. Haman went out that day in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the gate and observed that Mordecai neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, Haman was filled with rage. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends and his wife, Haman boasted to them, "I am the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the gate." Haman's wife and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on him." And this suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. Now that night, King Xerxes could not sleep, so he ordered the record of his reign to be brought in and read to him. It was found, recorded, that Mordecai had exposed two of the king's officers who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. "Well, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" the king asked. "Nothing has been done for him," his attendants answered. The king said, "Who's in the court?" Now, Haman had just entered to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai. The king's attendants answered, "Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in," the king ordered. And we're going to end it on that cliffhanger right there. But very quickly, let's talk through the passage. I want to point out a few more things in this passage to you. It gets even more interesting even when you dive in a little deeper. So, we've been nervous for Esther, knowing that if she approached the king at the wrong moment and he's in a bad mood, then she's going to die. But she stands there and she waits, and then King Xerxes sees her and says, "Esther, my beautiful wife, I haven't seen you forever, come on in." And he extends his gold scepter and she's saved. So, okay, we got through that. And he says, "Darling, what do you want?" And she says, "Well, if it's okay, I just want to have you and Haman come to a banquet." "Sounds great." So they go to a banquet. And while they're at the banquet, notice that it tells us in verse 6 that they are drinking. At the banquet, they say to her, or the king says to her, "What do you want?" And she says, "Well, what I want is for you guys to come back for another banquet." And King Xerxes says, "All right, that's a deal." And so they take off. And Haman, as he leaves, he's in a pretty good mood. He's been drinking. Then he sees Mordecai. And remember, Mordecai, everybody is supposed to bow down to him, because Haman is the second in command in all of Persia. Everybody else bows down to him, but Mordecai doesn't bow down. And Haman is angry. He gets home, he's grousing to his wife and to his friends. He's bragging at the same time. He says, "Hey, Queen Esther, she really likes me. She's inviting me to the banquet, nobody else, just me. But man, I can't stand that Mordecai." And so, all of Haman's friends and his wife say, "Here's an idea. Why don't you have a pole built that's 50 cubits high?" Now, if you're wondering how tall 50 cubits is, by modern standards, that's a 75-foot pole. That's a tall pole. I don't even know where you'd find a 75-foot pole. But they managed to construct or come up with this 75-foot pole. And what Haman is going to do tomorrow morning is he's going to go and talk to King Xerxes and say, "That Mordecai's the worst of all. Let's impale him." So, it's nighttime and King Xerxes can't sleep. One of the things that a few Bible scholars have speculated that's kind of funny is that maybe the reason King Xerxes couldn't sleep is because there was construction going on a 75-foot pole. Wouldn't that be ironic? So he can't sleep, so he says, "Hey, you guys come in here and tell me how great I am." So he has his people come in, they're telling him everything that's happened since he became king. And he's reminded of an episode that happened earlier when two of his bodyguards tried to assassinate him. And there was this dude named Mordecai. Now keep in mind, King Xerxes does not know the connection, nor does Haman know the connection between Mordecai and Esther. They've kept that connection quiet. He finds out about this guy named Mordecai that literally saved his life. And he says to his people that are reading to him, "What happened for this guy?" And they say, "Well, nothing happened to this guy." And he says, "Well, something needs to happen with this guy. He saved my life." He says, "Hey, who's out there? Who's out there that can go do something?" And they say, "Oh, it's your buddy Haman. He's just traipsing in right now." And so next Sunday, we will find out what happens when King Xerxes says to Haman, "Hey, Mordecai, that guy's a hero." We'll find out next week what happens there. But what I want to do very quickly, how am I doing on time? My goodness. We'll make this real quick. Let's talk about the type of people that God uses. First of all, I think we should talk about the type of people that God doesn't use, and that's people like Haman. What do we discover about Haman in this passage? I have to say that Haman is one of the best fleshed out bad guys in the entire Bible. Because what do we see about him? Just in this passage, we see that he's petty. We see that he is vengeful. We see that he's prideful. And I'm pretty sure that God doesn't use people who are petty and vengeful and prideful. On the other hand, what type of people does God use? Well, God uses people of purpose. God uses people of purpose. In this passage, Esther could have immediately gone to King Xerxes and could have said to him, "Hey, I need you to do me this massive favor." But she doesn't do that. And I think that that was very wise and very strategic on her part. Because King Xerxes hasn't seen her for a month. She needs to reestablish that rapport with him before she comes to him with this pretty significant request. He's already said that on the 13th day of the 12th month, that all the Hebrews in Persia are going to be put to death. And so for that to not happen, for her to make that request, she's got to be in pretty good standing. And so she's trying to reestablish that connection, that rapport, so that she can work her way up to that request. She's very purposeful about that. And I think that's very wise. I think that a lot of us, over the course of our lives, we've been around people that were very purposeful and always had a plan. We've been around people that aren't particularly purposeful and never seem to have a plan. And while there is something to be said for being spontaneous at times, I think there's a lot more to be said for having a plan and having a purpose. So, that's the first type of person that God uses, is people of purpose. The second type of person that God uses is people of conviction. God uses people of conviction. In this passage, we see that Mordecai is still refusing to bow down to Haman. Even though Mordecai knows that because he refused to bow down to Haman previously, that put his life in jeopardy, it's put all of the Hebrews' lives in jeopardy. And Haman, or rather Mordecai, if Mordecai wanted to say, well, maybe I should start bowing down to him, maybe he'll change his mind. But Mordecai wasn't going to do that, because he was a man of strong convictions. And again, friends, the type of people that God uses time and time again is people of strong convictions. Just think to our previous sermon series. We discovered that God used Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, who also refused to bow down, because they were also people of convictions. And that's the type of people that we need. We need to be people of convictions. That's the second type of person that God uses. The third type of person that God uses is God uses people of courage. God uses people of courage. Friends, in this passage, Esther takes this step that I think for a lot of us, we'd be pretty afraid to take. Knowing that if we catch the king in a bad mood, or he's drunk, or something weird happens, we're dead. That's the end of our lives, literally. But Esther took that step of faith. And I think Mordecai in this passage, he also displays courage in the fact that he doesn't bow down to Haman, even in the hopes that maybe he'll get Haman to change his mind. And when you think about the people that God uses throughout the Bible, from the beginning to the end, and everybody in between, think about people like Moses. Think about people like David. God uses people of courage. So friends, my question for you today is this: what type of person do you want to be for God? Do you want to be a person of purpose? Do you want to be a person of conviction? Do you want to be a person of courage? I'll let you think about that. What type of person do you want to be for God? And of course, we know the type of person Jesus was. Jesus was all those things. Jesus was a person of purpose and conviction and courage and much, much more. And friends, at this time, we're going to gather around the table where we honor the fact that Jesus, out of his purpose, out of his conviction, out of his character, he willingly went to the cross for us. And at this time, we will sing our communion hymn together. Our communion hymn is "Jesus, Keep Me Near the Cross." Friends, we're told that we should examine our hearts before we eat of the bread and drink of the cup. So let us take the next few moments for silent reflection.
Dear Lord Jesus, What a joy and privilege it is to fellowship with you, my Lord. No matter where I am or who I am with, I know that you are with me, and I rejoice, for my spirit can share this precious communion with you as I rest in your arms of love. As we partake of the bread and cup, we eat and drink in remembrance of him who died for us and rose again. Help us to live in newness of life and to walk worthy before you all the days of our life. This I ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Friends, at this time we're going to sing our closing hymn together. Then please reach out to me this week via email or by calling. Let me know what's on your heart. And finally, friends, for our benediction, as we go from here, let us go knowing that God has called us to be people of purpose, people of conviction, and people of